Welcome to Schemes and Stones. I'm your host, Kyle, aka Coyote.
And I am your host, Brian, and I go by Davos on the forums.
Now, before we get into today's episode, I want to first thank all our patrons. They really help support us and help us put out all this amazing content. So if you really enjoy listening or watching our content, you should check it out. We do release bonus content for those. We also put up polls for voting what we should do next, stuff like that for our patron members. Also, you should check out our other content for Schemes and Stones. We have a YouTube page, which we've been actively putting out new battle reports, including Vassal ones. We also have our Schemes and Stones blog, which we put up articles. And we also have a Discord if you want to join in live conversation about Malifaux and what's going on in the world. And finally, we have our Facebook page, which I have lots of ideas bouncing around there. So you can talk to me, let me know what you thought of different episodes, that sort of thing. And now, on to the show. Welcome to Schemes and Stones and our first initial impressions on the final release of the Explorers Society. So we're going to change this format up a little bit. I'm going to be potentially giving some general scoring from like 1 to 10 on the different types of traits on models. Now, if you don't know what I'm talking about here, you should listen to our Improving Play show, where we talked about how I'm going to be analyzing models in the future using certain terminologies such as like force, reach, that sort of stuff. And then when I'm talking about these models, I'll give you a general idea of how good they are at these different things, and then potentially give a score from like 0 to 10, a ballpark score of like where I think it is. Do keep in mind that these scores aren't 100% truthful because they should be weighed based on what the pool wants. For example, being able to place scheme markers with Don't Mind Me is going to have a lot more value in something like Leave Your Mark, where you need to drop markers in the middle and the opponent may be contesting it, than say a pool where that's not even a thing, like where scheme marker dropping isn't really that important, because obviously then that ability won't be nearly as relevant for the most part. So yeah, just keep that in mind when I give scores to things. All right. Anyways, let's get underway with the master of the EVS crew, and that is Maxine. So I'm going to take a look at her card real fast, pause it, and let you know what I think. Okay, so let's just go through these different traits real fast, and then we'll kind of talk holistically where I think she falls. So, starting with survival, I think she is pretty average given she's a master. And note, like most of these things I'm going to talk about in terms of their soulstone cost. So like I would expect a 10 soulstone model to be a lot more survivable than a 4 soulstone. So my ratings will be based on its cost. So as a master, she's pretty average, maybe even a little on the weak side, but I mean, she's 11 wounds, soulstone use, and she does have 2 steps ahead. That does give her some, she'll just straight dodge some attacks. Now, you can't guarantee which ones it's going to be because you never know what the opponent's going to flip. But there's going to be times where they just happen to flip the suit that you chose for polymath, and that suit becomes a 1, and you'll just dodge it because anything out of your hand's going to dodge it. Or you'll just flip a 5 will beat it. So that is going to give her a little extra survivability. She does have impromptu invention as well. That is more of a debuffing ability, or it can be debuffing or buffing. In the case of debuffing, if she's making things slow, making them distracted, giving them stunned, it's going to make her a little more survivable if they're wanting to attack her, because she's going to make them a lot less efficient at what they're trying to do, which is, in this case, probably kill her. So that will definitely help her survivability a little bit. But that being said, overall, she will still go down pretty quickly to focus fire or just a heavy hitter with like fast and min 3, yada, yada, yada. So nothing spectacular on that end. Now, action economy, this is pretty much where, this is one of her 2 big things that she's going to be focusing on. And action economy is mostly generated through impromptu invention. just because that lets her give out fast to her crew, or focus are the primary things. You can also give out other buffs, but those are the two I think that are going to see the most use by her. Now, the fast, she can give 2 models fast with the all-for-one trigger. And I think it's going to be pretty common for you to have that because you'll either stone for it, or very commonly it'll be your polymath suit. So any ram in your hand will do it, because polymath will make it a 9. And, well, polymath with reconfigure. So very common, and you should be positioning your models so you could hit 2 to give them fast, at least the first couple rounds. Maybe after that it'll vary. And then after that, you have the maximum force. So after you give 2 models fast, you'll then very likely give either one model focus 2. Can't be the ones that you made fast. Has to be a different one. You'll either give it focus 2, or you'll, again, give 2 different models focus 1. I think that's going to be a very common turn 1 play for her, is to just buff up her crew and then walk forward. And that, again, it's action economy, because you're essentially generating almost 2 AP, or actual 2 AP if it's fast, almost 2 AP if it's focus, from her one action. So you're multiplying your action economy. Now, you will also have a couple other abilities. You have Clockwork Revolver. On her trigger, draw out secrets. She can drop scheme markers at range, which can be highly efficient when you're shooting something 12 inches away and dropping a scheme marker, because it saves you from having to walk there. It saves you having to spend the action to drop it, and you're also getting damage out of it. So again, action economy on that one. And then she has Order and Chaos, which is a 6-inch place. That's also a bonus action, so she's essentially getting a free walk, better than a walk, because it's a place for her bonus action. So again, action economy is it's considered an additional action effectively. It's a better walk. Now, Drain, this is one where you want a low score. And in her case, she is pretty low. I would say she is below average as far as Drain. So if we're going on like the 1 to 10 scale, I would say she's probably like a 3, which is good in this case. Action economy, she's probably like an 8, which is good because you want a high score in that. Survival, pretty average. Maybe a 6, which is just above the dead middle of 5. So if we're keeping track of scores. So as far as Drain, the reason why she's so low Drain is because Captain of the Superior will be drawing you cards when models are going to be cheating with their reconfigure suit. So it's going to be very common, and it's a wide range. It's 8-inch, or that's huge. So it's going to be very common that normally the models that will be wanting to cheat will just be redrawing cards back because of that ability. So that's really going to help out with your Drain. Also, you have Order and Chaos. That should be increasing your deck strength if you're using it for your own deck, because you're putting high cards back in. So you're less likely to flip low cards, and you're less likely to need to cheat those flips because you're flipping high cards. So that should help with your Drain. Your mileage will vary, of course, on that one because it's random a bit. And then finally, you have your Age of Inspiration trigger. This is, again, some card drawing just to replenish your hand if you happen to hit it, which it is your polymath suit, or your reconfigure suit, I should say, not polymath. Polymath, you choose which suit it is at the start of the round. Reconfigure is what makes it a higher stat. So you should be able to get it off if you want it. So that being said, I think it's Draw Out Secrets is the better option, generally speaking. And that gets into the one thing that about her Drain, she will be using soul stones. So you definitely will want some soul stones for not just prevention, but also for hitting triggers, because her triggers are pretty important. And unfortunately, there are going to be a lot of rounds where you want to hit a couple of them, and you can only set one thing for your reconfigure. You can only set one suit of your choice. And the others, you're just probably going to have to stone to get them. So it's often going to be all for one, I think, because you're going to want to do that more often than not. But there will be times where you'll want to tome, so Draw Out Secrets will be consistently dropping schemes for you. But again, it'll vary based on the situation. So overall, pretty low Drain, though, because
Other than soul stones, most of the stuff should be coming from your hand, which you're replenishing. And yeah, generally, and you can be using the weak cards in your hand as actual value cards to hit TNs. So next up is Force. She's actually pretty good at Force as well, just because she has high stats, especially when she's debuffing, because Impromptu Invention's a 7 versus Willpower. Most Willpowers are 5 on average. So she's a +2, so in a lot of cases, she's not going to need the cheat period. So that's really nice. And also, whenever you give a model a debuff, especially with like All for One, something in 2 inches gains it, and they don't get to flip. You just choose a model within 2 of it. So effectively, you're hitting 2 of their models with potentially a really powerful debuff. And yeah, the second one doesn't even have a say in it. So you can target a crappy willpower model, like say a totem's next to a master. You can hit the totem. Actually, can you target master? You may not be able to target masters with this. Yeah, you can. So you hit the totem, and then you just give it to the master as well. So that's going to be something that you need to be looking for or watching out for if you're playing against her, because that will be a common trick to hit something that's easy to hit and then tagging the more important model. Like, for example, Zareta, who could actually normally dodge it. But if you hit the voodoo doll with a crap willpower and then throw it to Zareta from the voodoo doll because of All for One, you're going to hit. So something to keep in mind. She also, of course, has Reconfigure and Deep Discovery, which are going to consistently give her high cards. At least middling cards in case of Reconfigure. Deep Discovery could be potentially really high cards. So she'll be able to force things through pretty commonly, I think, for her. And now, a lot of times she will be targeting her own models for Impromptu Invention. But if she wants to force through, she can. And of course, like I said, all the card drawing will help with Force as well, just because it makes you more likely to have high cards to be able to cheat to make things happen. So I would say her Force ranking is also pretty high. I would say probably like an 8 as well, because she can force through what she wants to really well. Now we go to Denial. This kind of goes hand in hand with her forcing. As I said, Impromptu Invention is her main way of denial. So this pretty much is going to be stacking either distracted through maximum force, or you're going to be basically hitting 2 models that are next to each other with slower staggered. And at 8-inch range, staggering is pretty good. They probably won't be able to get to you if they're slow. It's not going to help that much against like riders, for example. But in the case of riders, you'll probably just make them slow instead. And hitting 2 models for slow is going to be, again, really good denial as you're lowering the opponent's action economy. You're basically costing them actions. One of your actions for 2 of their actions if you're hitting the All for One trigger, which is what you want to be doing on that. Or maximum force if you're hitting the distracted trigger, if you want to stack a bunch of distracted on like the rider as well. Say there's no model next to it, then you're probably going to go the distracted route. You can also double stun things, which your mileage will vary based on your opponent's crew, but stunning certain crews, it's going to just ruin them because they need their triggers. Again, riders are a really good target for this, or any master that just really relies on triggers to do what they want to do. Maxine, for example, is a good master to do that too, but thankfully she can't be stunned because of one of her abilities. And because, yeah, stunning her would make her basically dead in the water. She would not be able to do much of anything. Other cute tricks you can do with this is you can poison stack with, this is particularly with another model we'll talk about later, because he has an aura. Whenever something gets poisoned, it gets distracted. So you can sit there and stack a bunch of poison on things and give them distracted at the same time if that model's nearby those targets. So cool combo if you want to do that. You also, as far as denial, have Order and Chaos. Remember how you can increase your deck strength? Well, you can do the opposite too. You can lower the opponent's deck strength, basically reducing their or increasing their drain effectively, because you'll be shuffling in a bunch of bad cards back into their deck, ideally. And in that case, that makes them more likely to need to cheat out of their hand because they're going to be flipping low cards and failing to hit their TNs or hitting your models. So that's going to help out with that for you, make it worse for them. And then she does have card discard. This one's probably not her priority, but she does have Touch of Madness on her melee attack, although really she doesn't want to be in melee that much. Or, yeah, I think that's the primary one where you can just discard cards. So she has a little bit. It's not the primary thing, but yeah, I think the debuffing is the real big thing about Denial. And she can also use 2 steps ahead to do Force Denial as well. What I mean by this is, say they are like Howard Langston and they really want to execute you a bunch and Howard comes into her. If she knows that's going to happen, she can declare the crows as her polymath trigger, which means every crow that the enemy has in the duel becomes a value 1. So essentially, he's not going to be able to execute you because every execute trigger card he's going to be doing is a value of 1. So he's going to be like, oh, and I hit you with a 6 stat attack. It's like, cool, I cheated in a 3. I'm an 8. You miss. So that's definitely something you can keep in mind if you know the opponent wants to be hitting a specific trigger when targeting her. Now, it's only her, so a lot of times, I don't know how effective. It's more like a deterrent than, because once you do it, the opponent, as long as they're paying attention, will be like, oh, now I can't do that. I have to do something else. So I think it's more of a deterrent than an actual straight denial. Going to reach, this is how much of the board she can affect. It's not bad. It's not like insane by any means, but the ability to place 6 inches and then having a 12-inch gun or an 8-inch buff/debuff, depending on what you're doing, makes her range a little bit above average. I would say she's probably looking at like a 6 or a 7 if you want to give it a score. Yeah, because she can generally get where she kind of needs to and buff things as long as there's models. Yeah. I mean, she's going to be going towards other models, generally speaking, because she doesn't do much by herself. So, yeah, not bad, not great. As far as killing, this is pretty average. Yeah. I mean, 2, 3, 5. Now, it does get a slight nudge because Reconfigure can make those. You can cheat in weaks as moderates if you can cheat your damage flip. So she's more likely to hit 3 damage than 2 because of that if you are cheating. Or it's not more likely to flip it, but it's more likely, to be able to cheat it and use a low card to cheat in. So it's slightly, but it's still pretty average. Probably like a 6, maybe, as opposed to a 5 because of that reconfigurability. So how does she work? Like I said, generally she's going to start the game by just buffing all your crew with Impromptu Invention. Basically, you're going to hire a couple big scary models, give them fast, and then you're going to give some other models focus to just make them a little more efficient. I would say that's pretty much always what you're going to do. You're always going to prioritize fast over focus because fast focus is less than 1 AP equivalence, as we talked about in another improving play. It's more like 0.85 of an action as opposed to fast, which is a straight action. So you're mostly just going to be giving fast and focus turn 1 and then moving forward. And then after that, it really depends on what you're trying to do with her. I think commonly she'll keep wanting to use Impromptu Invention, and I think this is the ability she's going to be using most turns. This is the thing you want to be using most of the game. And that's basically either buffing your guys or debuffing their guys. And then if you want to start scheming with her, Draw All Secrets is where she's going to be. She's going to be wanting to shoot the enemies and drop scheme markers next to them because that's highly efficient. And unfortunately, your opponent probably will see it coming because you'll want to polymath a Toman, and then it'll be like, okay, why else would you do that than to make sure you're hitting those tome triggers to drop a bunch of markers? But whatever, at that point, hopefully they can't do anything about it, especially if she goes late and then just shoots a bunch of things at random places. Like, she could technically spread them out by herself. Yeah, if she's like in the middle of the board and the opponent. And mind you, it doesn't have to be an enemy model. You can shoot your own models to do this. So if you position 3 of your own models and maybe 1 enemy, or 2 of your models, and there's 1 enemy model there, if you move in the middle of the board, you could shoot all 3 of them as long as you have the tomes or stone for them, and then drop 3 scheme markers at the end of the round. I mean, yeah, she can solo do that one. Or yeah, just drop a pile, like even leave your mark. She could just shoot the same thing 3 times and drop 3 markers. So really nice for scheming. I think that's the thing most people are going to overlook on her at first. Probably not now that I've said that, but like if they don't listen to this, they're going to overlook that, I bet. All right, so yeah, that's where she is. I think overall she's pretty good master. Not anything that blows me out of the water. Not like, oh my gosh, this is S tier, but good. Like a good solid like master. All right, so let's move on to her totem. So I'm going to look at that one, pause it, and let you know what I think. All right, so Orville, he is a 4 Soulstone significant totem, which is nice. As far as survival, he only has 4 wounds. Basically, that's it. I mean, he's pretty quick, so he's going to be often in positions where the opponent shouldn't be able to get at him if you're playing him right. That being said, his survival is pretty low. I mean, realistically, probably like a 3 because like 2 hits from almost anything will kill him. One solid hit from something that can beat pretty well will kill him. And there's not much he can do about that. So, yeah, survival's kind of low. As far as action economy, not great on that regard either. Pretty average. I mean, it's not bad, but he's just average. His flight gives him a little bit of a leg up, but it doesn't actually give him additional actions. It just makes his move a little more efficient. Otherwise, the one thing he can do, the problem is it's suit inconsistent, and what I mean by that is you require, since he can't Soulstone, you need the right suit in hand to do it, and since it's an attack action, it has to be a high suit to hit, most likely. But he has the bouncing bombs on Up We Go, so he can potentially get an extra attack out of the Up We Go attack. But that being said, if you're willing to expend the cards and resources, it can be a really powerful attack. Because especially if you have focus, and focus goes to triggered attacks as well, you could potentially hit something for 4 damage on Up We Go, and then bouncing bomb something else for 3 and a blast. And if you're hitting 2 models with that attack, one from the initial hit and then one from the blast attack, that's essentially 9 damage that he can do off an attack. Maybe more if he hits more than 1 model with the blast, but that seems unlikely. So it's possible for him to spike up to 9 damage. That being said, it's not going to happen very often, so I wouldn't count on it, but it could happen. More of a desperation play, I guess, than anything, as he will die to the next thing that goes, probably. As far as drain, though, he's pretty low drain just because you're not going to be attacking too much with him. And the times you are attacking, you're attacking size, which you're even stat with, which is pretty good for a 4 Soulstone model to be attacking at an even stat because he's a stat 2 verse size, and most things are size 2. So as long as you're not going after a big beater, which you really shouldn't be with this guy, unless you, again, are kind of in a desperation mode or you really need to reposition something, maybe for like claim jump, you're trying to get it out of the center, something like that, then sure. But generally speaking, you're going to be just going after little models, or more likely just, interacting, moving and interacting, which shouldn't require cards. So I would say overall pretty low drain, more like a 4, probably on the moderate side or the average side, but low because you're not needing cards for him. As far as force, he can actually be pretty good force. Like I said, he's attacking most things on an even stat, which is really good for a 4 Soulstone model. He also has his aeronautical eccentricity, which is a hard word to say, but he essentially can walk out of engagement. So he's kind of like agile, but you have to hit the action. The bonus action really isn't an extra action because it's just allowing you to do something that you normally can't. That being said, if you hit the trigger, then it kind of is like action efficiency because you're pulsing out distracted, which is more like actually doing something. They have to pass the willpower duel or gain distracted, that is. So it's not an auto thing. But the main thing it's going to be used for, again, scheme running. Basically, if something tries to engage him, he can always do this bonus action and then just walk away. And then he can interact because he didn't take a disengage action. He took a walk action. and this ability lets him take a walk action while engaged. So, again, tends to lend himself towards being a scheme runner. And then if it was something scary, if you can hit that trigger, which is your reconfigure suit, I might add, which is good, that lets him then distract that model potentially. So then if it tries to keep chasing him, hopefully it'll start missing and not killing him. Not guaranteed, but it is potentially. And then, of course, he has Deep Discovery and Reconfigure, which should help lower his drain as well, and give him a little more likelihood of being able to force something through, mostly with Deep Discovery in that regard, because, you know, if the opponent has a 13 on the top of their discard pile, all of a sudden all his up we goes are going to be a 15 stat, and that should hit basically anything unless they have a stat, a size 3 model that you're going after, which really he shouldn't be going after those things. So, yeah. Pretty decent force, especially for his cost. It's really good. In general, it's probably like a 6 as far as like if you're not accounting for cost. If you're counting for cost, he's probably more like a 9 because that's really, really good for his cost. Now, as far as denial, basically he just has positional denial. Up we go, so he can just reposition enemy models or friendly models if you want to attack them. Mostly it's going to be used to throw enemies out of position. So pretty average, slightly above because Up We Go can be pretty decent. So more like a 6. Then as far as reach, again, slightly above average just because he has a 2-inch melee, which is really nice. And he also has flight and move 6. So he's pretty fast. So he can get to a lot of parts of the board. Plus he can just walk out of engagement, which definitely helps with getting to spots to interact without being stopped by the enemy. So slightly above average, maybe a 7, more likely 6, 7, that range. As far as killing, this is again one of those caveat ones where if you count for his cost, he's pretty good for his cost because, you know, 2, 3, 4 is above what I would expect a 4 Soulstone model to be at. Usually they're more like 1, 2, 3 or something like that. But, I mean, I guess 2, 3, 4 is not unheard of for Soulstone. But reconfigured, obviously, is going to make it more likely to hit moderate, or more potential to hit moderate. And if he is going in and attacking, he does kind of want focus because of bouncing bombs. You want to be treating in bouncing bombs and getting that but plus to damage on that flip as well, because that makes it a lot scarier. So yeah, killing is probably definitely above average for a 4 Soulstone. In general, though, I would say it's still pretty average for most models, so it's like dead middle 5. And again, like I said, if you're willing to put a lot of cards into it and focus and all these things, you can spike damage with him, which I think is more of a good like catch the opponent off play, because your opponent won't be expecting this guy to deal like 9 damage between multiple models against him, which can be brutal if done right, especially if they have 1-inch engagements and he doesn't even end up engaged after doing it. So then he can then walk away or whatever. So overall, I'd say he's a pretty good totem. I would say he's definitely an asset to this crew and not just one of those totems that just doesn't do much. So mostly your scheme runner, probably, often than not, but he can be really good at, you know, repositioning enemies, potentially even repositioning your own guys if you need to. That's more of a desperation play, though, because you don't really want to hurt them that much, but you can do it if you need to. And he also does have a unique ability, Scout Ahead, which is a weird ability to try to identify what it is doing. It's mostly going to be it's going to get more value against bad players, I guess, is the best way to put it. Because bad players, it forces the model to deploy early, before anything else deploys. So if your opponent has a lot of weird unpacking they have to do, and they don't have it memorized, like how they should unpack properly, then this can throw it off. Like, it can really screw up basically it's going to screw up their activation order, especially if there's a choke point where they're deploying. You can deploy that model they want to deploy last, like, you know, maybe a rider or something that can hit pretty hard that they want to keep unactivated to threaten. and put it in front, the closest point to the choke point, to force it to activate first, or the rest of his crew gets bottlenecked and can't move. So, like, it can potentially be brutal, but you don't get to choose where it deploys. So, I mean, a good opponent will have a good sense of where it should be going anyways. So I don't think you're going to get as much value from that against better opponents. But worse opponents, I think you'll definitely get some value because they just won't think about it until after the fact. And then they'll realize the model's in a bad spot. And they'll be like, oh, crap, now I have to be less efficient because I have to move around it, etc., etc. So, interesting ability. All right, so moving along, let's look at the Henchman Kia. So I'm going to pause real fast. All right, so Kia is a 10 soulstone, quote-unquote, beater, I would say. As far as survivability, she's above average, but for a 10 soulstone model, I would expect it to be tough. So it's more like a 6, still fairly average for a 10 soulstone model because it's just 9 wounds, which is under the 1 wound per soulstone cost. She can soulstone though, and she does have armor. So, and she can generate shielded on herself, although usually it's not going to stick around, as we'll get into in a moment. But generally speaking, it makes her tougher than, slightly tougher, maybe a 7, but generally probably like 6, 7 as far as cost efficiency. Now, if you're not taking in her soulstone costs into effect, definitely a 7. I don't know about an 8. She doesn't seem like she's incredibly tough enough to get an 8, but definitely 7's good. All right, so action economy. How many extra actions is she going to get? Not really. Especially, again, 10 soulstone model, I expect to have a extra action somewhere. It either has to be generating a passive ability that's just insanely good, or it should be a 3 or 4 AP model. I mean, the extra actions are usually hidden in the bonus action and the triggers, that sort of thing. But she doesn't really have much. The only thing she has is the Discus Grenade with the trigger bouncing bombs. Again, it's kind of like the Orville thing where you could potentially do a lot of spike damage if you hit multiple models with it. But I feel like this one's a little more telegraphed because they're expecting her to do something like that. So they're going to be looking out for it. I mean, maybe not first when they don't know what the heck your crew does, because that's going to be a Explorer's advantage for the first few games because people just don't know what you do. But I don't know. Like, she really isn't that efficient of a model. And whenever I talk about action economy and efficiency, those words tend to be aligned most of the time. So she's just not highly efficient for the most part. She's actually the opposite of that, which we'll go into, and that is her drain. She's a high drain model. She's one of those models that wants to eat a bunch of resources to do what she wants to do. Now, her force is pretty good, so she can make sure things happen when she goes, but it's going to cost you. And what I mean by that is she really wants focus, because her 2, 4, 6 damage track, she really wants to be hitting 4 and 6. Now, again, reconfigure helps with that, but she really wants to be on a bonus, on a positive for that damage flip because she wants to cheat it. She wants to hit at least 4 damage, and it's going to feel real bad if you just hit 2, especially for a 10 soulstone model. So she really wants focus. And she really wants to use her bonus action every round to get shielded because that's how she forces things through, as we'll talk to more momentarily. So, yeah, she's definitely... And you want the high cards to attack with her because generally the things she's attacking are things you want to remove and your opponent's going to want to try to save them. So she's going to be using high cards. The only thing she does help with drain is Ruthless. So if they are a primarily terrifying defensive crew, she's good at getting around that because Ruthless, they don't have any of that. Now, where she does shine is Force. Force is just being able to push through. In this case, her damage is what she wants to force, and that's because she can get irreducible damage on her attacks. So basically, her damage will hit and will kill if she can get it through. Now, in order to do that, she needs shielded. So she has to reduce her shielded when she attacks to make it irreducible. So this is where it gets awkward, because her bonus action gives her 1 shielded. So she'll generally always have that 1 attack, because she'll do the bonus action first to get shielded, and then she'll do the attack. But the second attack won't always be irreducible, which feels kind of bad when you're paying 10 soul stones for it. And this is why you're paying 10 soul stones for this model. If she did not have irreducible damage, she'd be terrible for her cost. But the irreducible is what makes her justifiable. And that means you need to have shielded on her. Now, of course, her Maxine can get shielded on her with her abilities. She can max force and that sort of thing. But then she has to go before that shielded is knocked off. The opponent obviously knows this is a big deal. And when you want her as your beater, you want her because she can do irreducible damage. AKA, you want her in matchups where she's going to be getting through armor and stuff like that, because you know armor is going to be prevalent. So the opponents will want to attack her to get rid of the shielded to make sure she's not doing irreducible damage. So then you have this weird mini game of like, can I get this on her and get it to last so I can use it? It does make her a good kind of a pseudo tank in that case then, but because then she's taking hits instead of your other models because they're wanting to reduce the shielded. So, I mean, that does have some advantages, but it's not really what she wants to be doing, is to be eating attacks for your other models necessarily. So basically the gist is she's definitely has 1 irreducible attack a round. Maybe 2. Maybe 3 if you're able to give her fast and have shielded on her from something else. It can't be Maxine at that point, because fast is how... Yeah, Maxine can't double stack things on the same model. So definitely high force though. Also the auto damage from blasting is force because the opponent can't resist once they get hit by the blast. And there's also the convulsions trigger, which is her reconfigure suit to reposition model. So she can force reposition pretty well because she's going to be eating all those high cards and stuff. And you're very commonly going to be cheating in crows because, you know, it's a reconfigure trigger. Because you'll also get bonus cards if Maxine's around, that sort of thing. Of course, Deep Discovery will help force things through too, because if your opponent has a 13 in there on the top of their discard pile, you're going to be using that very often because you can. So, and you want her attacks to go through. So, mostly she is a force model. As far as denial, again, convulsions can reposition and things. That's really it as far as denial. A backlash on her bonus action, which you'll commonly will be using a crow for that, because you can cheat in a low crow because reconfigure. So it pushes enemies, but they have to attack her, so they kind of know it and they can kind of control it. So that's not as much a denial piece. That's more of like, get the hell away from me. Well, I guess it's denial in the sense it's action efficiency denial. So there's that. Reach, pretty low overall. Oh, and I would say her force is pretty good. I would say like an 8. And then her denial is pretty average, like a 5, maybe a 6. And then reach, I would say, again, pretty average, like a 5. 2-inch reach is nice, but 8-inch range on her attack. But otherwise, she doesn't really have a way to like dive per se. She's going to be front to back fighting, which really limits her ability because she can't really hit the target she wants to hit. She has to hit the target that's in front of her, unless Orville's repositioning things for her or something. But that's not her, that's Orville. So I would say probably a 5 reach, nothing special. And then killing, again, this is what she's generally in there for because of the irreducible killing. But that being said, her killing actually is pretty average for a 10 Soulstone model. I would say it's like a 6, 7 for a for just a general model. But for a 10 Soulstone, it's kind of bad because 2, 4, 6 is not great for a damage track just because it relies on so much drain to do things. I mean, I guess it's decent, but it's never guaranteed whenever it's a 6 because if you're hitting hard to wound stuff, the focus just counters it and then you still need a high card. Now, generally they have low stats, but it's not guaranteed by any means. And hitting something for 2 damage when you pay 10 soul stones is not great. Now, hopefully at least it's 2 irreducible damage, but that second attack may not be irreducible. It may just be 2 damage, like 10 soulstone model, spending 1 of her 2 AP to do 1 damage feels bad. So, not great. Discus Grenade, again, in the right matchups, that is probably actually your better action in the right matchups if they have a lot of spam, like a lot of cheap models, and they want to bubble, that sort of thing. And even like in like Hoffman, like it could do work just because of all the blast. Like a lot of times for Hoffman crews, you want to nickel and dime them as opposed to hitting straight damage, because in her case, she can do irreducible damage. So she'll probably still want to hit things. But like maybe Hamlin, like this is actually a decent ability because she can sit there and blast a bunch of things if they're grouped up, especially when you have issues with certain models having stealth and some not. You can blast onto the stealth things, that sort of thing. So Discus Grenade will actually be her better attack in the right matchup. That being said, I don't know if you bring her in those matchups. I'd just bring a different model, probably. Because the matchups, when you bring her, you're bringing her because you know there's going to be a lot of reducing. And you're bringing her because she does irreducible damage, basically. So she is very matchup dependent in my mind. I think there are going to be matchups where you're going to definitely want her. Again, like if you're playing like armored balls, like Hoffman, maybe Von Stuck, things, maybe if you're playing Colette with a lot of Corfy and stuff like that. Although, with all the stacking of distracted, that may not be that great against Colette, to be honest. Yeah, better off against like the non-debuffing hard armor balls. That sort of thing is when or incorporeal. This model is great against incorporeal crews because most of those models are terrifying incorporeal is what they're relying on, and she gets around both those things. So, yeah, good against things like probably Dreamer, Karai, Jackdaw. Those crews, that's where you really want her with the Ruthless and Irreducible. Otherwise, not that impressive. She's definitely not an auto take. I think you're going to be better off taking the other model we're going to talk about in a moment, or just taxing in something else from, like, the Seeker Henchman is going to be a super common taxed in model, I guarantee you. He's going to be like the Fiona Guild, where you're going to see him in a lot of crews. But we'll get to that when we talk about Seekers. All right, so let's move on to the next one. This is Harata. So I'm going to take a look at his card and let you know what I think. All right, so this is a 9 Soulstone Enforcer. He is EVS and Performer because Lord knows Colette needs more good models, and this is a good model. So he is starting off with Survival. Not great, actually. He has a weird combo that can make him more survivable, but it's not guaranteed, so I'm not in love with it. But in theory, it should work. He's only 9 wounds. He has no defensive tech other than like good stats, but I consider that more force than survival. And his other survival mechanic is the debilitating poison, because when things get poison around him, they get distracted. So the idea is, I think, well, his main attack and his reconfigure stat are poison. So, or I should say, his reconfigure stat is the trigger for his main attack to give poison. So I think the idea is he's hitting something, doing damage to them, then poisoning them, and giving them distracted. So he makes hitbacks hard. So ultimately, I think we're going to talk about what he does, but I think he's supposed to go after those non-armored beaters and prevent them from beating him back because they have a bunch of distracted on them. He also combos with Maxine pretty well if you want to do poison stacking with her maximum force, because you're stacking poison and distracted on things, which can be painful. And then if you have poison combo models to go with that from other keywords, primarily, you can maybe do a weird poison engine. I'm not sure if that'll be any good, but it's something you could do. I'm thinking probably the Cadmus. I don't know how well that would work. The Cadmus Henchman does poison stuff. Maybe. I'd have to look at that really, though, to decide if that's worth it. But anyways, going to action economy, not great. It's pretty average. Oh, survival, I would say, for his cost, he's probably like a 5. He's pretty average. Just wounds to soulstone cost. That's basically it. Maybe even a little worse because he can't soulstone or anything. Well, with the debilitating poison, maybe a 6. But anyways, action economy. So this is extra actions. He does have a pretty good bonus action, so you will be wanting to do that pretty often. And that can generate a lot of action economy if you're doing, there are 3 choices when you do it. If you do the 2-2 one, where scheme marker dropping pushes models, that's pretty efficient as far as actions, because then all of your models can just drop scheme markers and push enemies, which is great. That's going to be more of a Colette thing, though, than an EVS thing, I think. But still, EVS can use it. The other is his crash ability, his trigger on it, specifically claimed by the C. He can basically get rid of scheme markers from 8 inches away because it's a pulse attack. It pulses and can blow up scheme markers from the pulse. That being said, it is suit inconsistent, as I like to say, meaning that you just have to have the suit in hand because you can't stone for it, and there's no other way to do it that I can think of. So you just have to have it in hand, or you have to wait for the deep discovery where the opponent flips it. But that feels very luck based and not like a tactical thing. More like just, did you get lucky with that, and the opponent happened to have that up. So yeah, overall not great for action economy. Slightly above average though, maybe. Probably a 6 to be honest though. So drain. Fairly decent drain model, which is not good. I would say he's probably like maybe a 6 or 7 because he's going to want his high cards because he's a beater model. So he's one of your premier beaters unless you're taxing in one. So you're going to want his high cards for attacking. And you really want him to hit because you want the poison to be going off so you cannot get hit back. So he's really going to want to make sure he's hitting that. And then he wants to do his bonus action every round because it's pretty good, and that takes an 8. So you're consistently burning at least an 8 just for a bonus action, and then you're wanting probably higher cards for his attacks just to make sure they go through because they do double duty as far as dealing damage and preventing him from dying, depending on what he's going after. So I would say he's above average on drain. You're going to want to be putting cards into him. And then he has force. His force is going to vary. In the right crews, it skyrockets. In the average crew, it's above average, but that's it. So the skyrocket is distraction aura. If the enemy crew has a lot of willpower based stuff, or I guess it's mostly if you have a bunch of willpower attacking things. He does not. Maxine does, so it's going to make her debuffing easier. But if you are able to bring, I'm not sure if anything else in the crew really attacks willpower, but if you tax in or versatile in models that attack willpower, you're going to get a lot more force out of this because it puts them on minuses, which means they're going to be really hard pressed to actually be able to get through. Again, I think this is more of a Colette thing than an EVS thing. But if you tax in the right things, you'll get some value out of it. Otherwise, normally, his deep discovery should help force some things through. Reconfigure will be able to help a little bit as far as forcing as well. Everything else seems very suit dependent. Again, the claimed by the C can be force marker removal, but it's suit dependent. Then you also have Echoes of the Ocean, which is, I guess that's force in the sense of stopping the opponent from removing your markers. You're forcing your marker placement, essentially. Because whenever, and this is probably one of the premier abilities on his card and why he wants to be sitting in the middle, because when the enemy removes your marker, you just replace it, basically. You slightly move it. Because I guess you could place it. Does it have to be in base yeah, it has to be in base contact, so yeah, maybe slightly shifts it or whatever. But it basically prevents opponents from being able to remove your markers because you just keep redropping it, essentially. So that one's pretty good as far as forcing that to make sure your markers stay where you want them. Otherwise, his Haka ability, like we talked about, the strongest is the repositioning. Again, dropping a scheme markers to push enemies because they don't resist it. They can't do anything about it. All they can do is try to stop you from being able to drop a marker. But against Colette, that's just impossible. Against EVS, it's more possible, but like you can still do it. And remember, this combos with Maxine because Maxine can shoot somebody drop a marker, and then if this aura is up, it pushes them 3 inches too. So she's getting a 3-inch push and a marker drop and damage if she hits. So that's a pretty cool combo. Definitely good combos with the master there. So I would say force is above average, probably like a 7. Then denial. Denial's mostly in action economy denial with the debilitating poison. Again, the whole idea being you are hitting them and they're not being able to hit you back because they have distracted on them. You also have another Haku ability, which increases the opponent's drain because they're losing their efficiency. If you do the Nagiri ability, this one is actually, those are all like sushi types, maybe? I don't know. They're all fish. Anyways, the Nagiri ability enemies ignore their plus flips when targeting models in the aura. So essentially it's a 4-inch aura, and all those friendly models then can ignore pluses to duels and damage flips. So it shuts off focus really hard, which is nice. Again, combos with Colette probably better because now they can't get rid of manipulative or serene continence or anything like that. Again, this guy's really good for Colette, which she didn't need. As far as EVS, it helps against like if you're facing against like Cooper or something like that, that has a lot of plus flips because of their predatory instinct, that sort of stuff. It's good, but it's mostly just a denial piece and makes them drain more cards, increases their drain because their plus flips they're now going to have to cheat and they're just not going to have. Also lowers their force a little bit too because they can't force through damage as well because they lose their plus flips. And it still gives them a straight flip so they can cheat though. So like I said, it's mostly increasing their drain. So they have the drain on their hand, that is. As far as reach, he's dead average. He doesn't really have anything special there. He's pretty middle road, so like a 5. 2-inch reach is nice for his, but that's more drain than it is actually quote-unquote reach in my sense, reach being how much of the board you can affect. Then finally, killing. Again, this is one of his main things he wants to be doing, and that's because he has a 3-4-5 damage track, which is pretty good. Nothing crazy, but, you know, it's definitely beater damage track, so, you know, 7, 8. If you count poison as extra damage, which kind of is, it's kind of like a 0.8 of a damage because it's after the model goes. But if you, and since that is your reconfigure trigger and you want to be hitting the poison to distract them, that's going to be hitting more often than not because of reconfigure. So, yeah, I would say his killing's probably like a 7. So pretty good at that, and that's what you're taking him for mostly. That and the ski marker anti-removal, essentially. So, and he can also do a little extra damage if he does his other Haku, which is the, Peru, I think is how that's pronounced. I'm probably saying these all wrong. But anyways, it does extra ping damage to the enemies when they fail duels against models in that 4-inch aura. Has to be by 3, though, so that's throwaway attacks. So it's going to be more effective against models that are like taking throwaway actions. That's probably the worst one of the Haku. I don't think you ever do that one, to be honest. I think the other 2 are the ones you're going to be doing. The only exception is if you have terrifying models somehow and they're taking minus to willpower because of the terrifying duels. But I mean, where you're having to tax him. I guess if you're taxing him into a crew with a lot of terrifying, that'll get value, but that's all I really see. Anyways, overall, pretty good model. I think he's better for Colette. He's like a monster for Colette. But for EVS, I think he's still a solid model, and he has some cool combos with Maxine. So, yeah, definitely a model I think you're going to take more often than not for that beater. One of those beater roles, if not 2. Although Maxine really wants multiple beaters because of how she works. She's a force multiplier with action economy by giving fast focus, as we said. All right, so moving on, we're going to talk about the Tide Caller. So let's take a look at it. All right, I like this guy just because he's a shenanigan-y model more than anything else. So survival, actually decent, above average. especially even for his cost, because 8 wounds at 8 soulstone plus armor is pretty good. He also ignores hazardous terrain for what that's worth. Your mileage will vary a lot on that one, but pretty tough overall. Then, as far as action economy, he's actually pretty good at this because he has Toss, and he has Heavy Torrent, which is a variant of Toss. So, Toss obviously lets you throw your own models 10 inches forward, so I think a common play for him is to sit next to a couple of models that are getting fast turn 1, and then he just hurls them forward, and then they're effectively getting 2 free walks from each of those AP. So it's essentially turning 1 AP to 2 AP, because you're throwing those guys up the board, and then they're hopefully getting able to make 3 strong attacks turn 1, and that's 2 different models you can do that for. So pretty good as far as action economy. Otherwise, you can throw enemies backwards or into walls and stuff like that. So again, decent. Heavy Torrent is also kind of a pseudo bonus action, or plus action, because it's a bonus action that actually is an action, effectively. And it's a little weird in how it works, but essentially it's another toss, but it's a toss from range. So the way it works is you measure the distance between you and the target, and the amount you can move them is subtracted from that. That distance is subtracted from the toss. So if the model is 5 inches away from you, you can toss it 5 inches, essentially. If the model is 8 inches away from you, you can toss it 2 inches. Now, it's any direction, which is super nice, but it gives you a decently ranged reposition, which is really nice to be able to screw with people's position from that far away without... Yeah, it's still concealment and friendly fire and all that applies, though, because it is a gun icon, unfortunately. But still, really nice ability, especially late round if you want to reposition things. Now, as far as drain, it's not... it's fairly average. I mean, it's probably a little above average because its attack being a 2-4-6 really, again, wants focus because that min 2 feels bad. Also, the Heavy Torrent is going to take an 8 for it to go off, and you really want to be using it every round because it's a really good ability. So this is kind of a drain model. It's going to be taking probably a 7 just because it requires that 8 every round. That being said, you have Reconfigure, so it's a mask for his case. So generally you can cheat in low mask. So it's still taking cards out of your hand, but hopefully it's only taking like a 1 a mask kind of thing. So... he is more heavy drain. I think that puts him back down to maybe a 6 because of the reconfigure ability. So as far as forcing, he's good at forcing reposition because his toss ability is a 4 verse size. So he's going to be at a +2 advantage against most models. So he can force it, basically, is what I'm getting at. There are very few models where if he has a 13 in hand, they can even stop it, unless they have laugh off, basically, is the one thing that they can do. Against anything else, it has to be a size 3 and a red joker, or a size 4 and a red joker. Actually, yeah, it has to be a size 4 and a red joker to actually dodge it. So, yeah, he's going to be able to force the tosses through, or the Heavy Torrent, which is the range toss, essentially. So that's pretty good for repositional force. Also, again, Reconfigure and Deep Discovery are going to help force through things because you just have higher value cards than the opponent, generally speaking. As far as denial, positional denial. That's what he does. He repositions enemies. You're most likely going to be targeting your own models early, and then from there, it depends on the circumstances. If it's a positional-based scoring strategy or scheme, then he's going to be using this to deny position and make them burn extra AP to get back in position kind of thing. There's also activation order denial, if that can be, I guess that's kind of a thing, essentially because you're forcing them to have to wait on certain activations, because if you can just throw them 10 inches away, they need to be able to get back into position, so they may have to hold off their activation in that case. As far as reach, again, decent because of that 10-inch Heavy Torrent. Now, unfortunately, you can't throw them as far. If they're at 10 inches, you can't move them at all, really, so... because that's 10 minus 10. So you have to be at least 9 inches to move them at all within 9 inches. But that being said, I think it does give his reach makes his reach better, but where he really excels in the reach is increasing other models' reach by throwing them forward. So again, that kind of plays into the action economy thing as well. But it could be both, depending on how you look at it, because it's either, oh, you saved 2 walks, action economy, or it's, I threw you 10 inches to give you extend your reach kind of thing. So again, good ability. Killing for 8 soulstone, I'd say it's pretty average, maybe a little bit above, because of the reconfigure. Hitting 4 is more likely for you to hit 4 as long as you have focus, or just hitting a high card above the opponent. So slightly above average, but really still pretty average for his cost. So like a 6, I would say. But yeah, when you take him, I really like him. I actually played in the beta a bit and played him. I really liked him. He always did good things for me in the positional game. I think he is a very common take because of how Maxine wants to play. I think you're commonly want to be playing in matches where you can really speed up your crew. Like I said earlier, give 2 models fast and then throw them 10 inches up the board. And now you're really putting a lot of pressure on the opponent to have to deal with it. So overall, I think it's a pretty good model. It'll be a pretty common take. All right, so moving along, we're going to talk about Dr. Bibi and Calypso. This is a really complicated model, so I'm going to take a minute to look at this thing. I'm going to pause and let you know. Okay, so we're going to talk about specifically the combo of the two, and then we'll talk about taking Calypso individuals. I don't think you ever take Bibi by himself, but Calypso, there are times where you will. So first off, as far as survivability, as a combo, great. They are a tank. That is the whole point of it. It literally is like a tank. It's like a sub-tank. But typically, Bibi is going to be inside of this thing, which means it's a pretty good stat, 6'5", and then it's armor 2, 6 wounds, so fairly durable. And Bibi can heal it while he's inside of it, so he can sit there and heal it for 4 every time Bibi activates. And that's all. He can't really do anything else while he's in it, so that's what he's going to be doing more often than not. That or taking his attack, which is, it's okay. It's pretty average. So generally he's going to be healing Calypso, though, and Calypso's going to be tanking something. And plus, when Calypso dies, Bibi just unburies himself, and he can then recreate the Calypso with a scrap marker. Now, you can't, when he demises, I don't think he drops. Yeah, he doesn't drop a scrap marker, so you'll have to generate a scrap marker, but you have a couple of ways to do that. With Bibi, I believe, and Calypso have triggers that can do it, I believe. So, yeah, as long as you can get that scrap marker, you can just resummon it as a bonus action and then just hop back inside of it. So, again, tank model. As far as action economy, the only real thing, they basically... So the way they work is when Bibi is inside Calypso, Bibi can take his actions or he can take Calypso's actions. So you can effectively make Calypso a 6 AP model, kind of, but it's through 2 activations. It's 3 on one and 3 on the other. And his bonus action is kind of a full action. Well, it depends on which one you take, but one of them is. So in that case, it's kind of 3 every time he goes. That being said, though, it's really 2 models, though. So, it's probably overall better just because together, when you purchase them together, they're only 10 soulstone. So you're kind of treating it as a 10 soulstone single model. In that case, it's hyper efficient as far as action economy. But if you think of it as 2 separate models, not really. It's a little bit because of Onward, and that's on Calypso, where it's a bonus action. It's like Nimble, but you have to pay for it. And I think, honestly, as a quick aside, I think this should have been a thing a long time ago. I think a lot of flurries and a lot of nimbles and a lot of these take an extra action of this or rapid fire, they should have been onwards. They should have been bonus actions that require you to cheat a certain level card. And then, of course, if it's a really good model, like a high-end model, then it can just be discard any card. But food for thought. I think that should be a more common ability you see. So... yeah, depending on how you look at it, action economy can be skyrocketed high if you think of it as a single 10-point model, or a little above average if you think of it as 2 different models. So as far as drain, this card is a little above average in the sense that its drain is kind of low, just because Bibi is drawing you cards. Now, granted, it's 2 5s, but because you have reconfigure, those are generally going to be 5s that are going to turn into 9s. So he's drawing 2 9s every round, which is pretty good. So, and that helps counter your own drain because you're cheating those cards and then redrawing them. So, yeah, I'd say his drain is actually, he's kind of anti-drain in a way. So it's pretty good in that sense. So I'd say probably like a 3 because it's anti-drain. And then forcing. Forcing's actually pretty good on this crew because of the beeps and sweeps ability. I take that back because I said earlier that he wants to be healing most of the time. Actually, now I'm gonna step back and say I lied about that because his beeps and sweeps is actually the ability. If you don't have any damage on you and you're not worried about dying, this is the ability you want to do. It is a tactical pulse injure, which is fantastic. The reconfigure, unfortunately, though, on this is not high enough. You can't actually cheat the reconfigure card in because it needs a 10. So that does make this guy a little bit higher drain if you're wanting to do it. And it also makes it where you're not going to be spamming it. Very unlikely to spam because that would take 2 10s out of hand, which is, unless they have, if the opponent's top card is a 10 or higher, then you're going to just chuck 2 low cards to pulse this out twice, which that's where it gets really good. And then you're pulsing injured 2 to everything in a pulse 4. Oh, it's once per activation. Never mind. You can do it once. Still, injured 1 in a pulse 4 where they don't even get to react to it is still pretty good. So there's going to be a lot of times you're going to be using that because that is strong. Injured, if you haven't figured out at this point, can be really, really good. And it just improves your ability to force. So, and that brings us into force. So, other than that, Calypso ignores resistance triggers on his attacks. And like I said, he can take it 4 times a round. So, the 2, 3, 4, while not great, is really great against models that need that resistance trigger, say like Colette, who wants to bury, things like that. It can be pretty good against that sort of thing. Anybody, again, that relies on resistance triggers to stay alive or do cool things, like Tony's punch back is another good example. Being able to just say, nope, you don't punch me back. Nope, you don't punch me back. It really reduces her effectiveness, especially when you're getting 4 of these around. Otherwise, his trigger Massive Tentacles is actually really good. That's a good force one. If you're able to hit it, which he gets Bibi's reconfigure if Bibi's inside of him. So he will commonly be able to hit it with low tomes if you want it. And that's pretty good force because it's just an auto push. It's a pulse. Again, another pulse. They don't get it to resist it. And you just move them 2 inches. And they suffer 1 damage. So that gets really good. And that includes the target. It's all models in that pulse. So essentially it makes him a min 3 as long as you're hitting that, which then makes him kind of scary when he's doing min 3 effectively every punch. Now it's less effective against incorporeal because they reduce it to 0 every time, but non-incorporeal stuff, even armor stuff, that's actually probably just as good against armor because it's individual sources of damage that will always do 1. So that's where the model gets really good, I think, if you can hit that trigger a lot. Yeah, and that increases its damage, I think. But otherwise, yeah, reconfigure and deep discovery has always helped force through things because just good cards will make you more likely that you can force things through. Denial, again, positional denial through Massive Tentacles triggers. This is the main thing. You can also destroy terrain, which is kind of denying the opponent's ability to do certain things if they rely on terrain. Probably not going to be used too often, but it'll be good in certain matchups. Like if you're playing against Ivan, for example, and has a bunch of shadow markers, being able to destroy in a pulse, fairly decent sized pulse because it's a 50 mil base and a 3 inch off of that. So you're looking at like, a base is what? 50 is around 2 inches, so it's like a 5 inch diameter pulse. That can get rid of a bunch of shadow markers, potentially. So that can be good in the right matchup. So, yeah. Overall, though, pretty average as far as denial. And force, I would say it's probably like a 7 maybe, because the injured and the mining tools ignoring resist triggers. And as far as denial, I mean, it's pretty average, I would say, like maybe a 6, slightly above the dead center average. Reach, it's, again, nothing special, probably a 5, nothing. It doesn't really have any long-range things, and it can only affect the things near it. The wide pulses are nice, but the opponent could probably avoid those if they just stay back a little bit. Well, Onward does help, because he basically has a free walk every round. Now, the tank is only move 4, and by tank I mean Calypso is only move 4, although I think it's move 5 in, yeah, because I think, like, its stats, or I forget exactly where, but, like, there was a way for it to easily give it +1 movement, as long as it's around, like, somebody or something like that. But, yeah, it's still kind of slow, generally speaking, so, I don't know. I think its reach is kind of low. It's mostly just, like, when they send their hot beater in, this thing just goes and tanks it, kind of thing. Or it goes after the resistance triggered model that needs those, if it can get to it. Again, it's going to have a hard time probably getting to Colette to actually get use out of that. But Tony is a perfect model for this thing to go into. Otherwise, killing, we already talked about that. 234 is not very good for a 10 Soulstone model, but if you're able to get it to hit the trigger and be doing mid 3, it starts getting really good. But that's not going to be consistent. So overall, I think it's a pretty good model. It's interesting. It has a lot of weird dynamics it's going to do, but it's mostly a whole, it's, as Landon likes to talk about, it's a model that can hold space. It basically just sits in an area of the board and kind of hold it, and it can deter models from wanting to be in that area because of what it does. So the other thing it can do, and this is something I think you're going to see fairly common, is a taxed in Calypso. What you're going to see is people taxing in Calypso, putting in Scary Beater model, and running it up the board and popping it out. So essentially, it's going to take its climb aboard action to throw the model inside of it. It's going to then move 8 inches, probably after the model goes, I would say. And then round 2, it'll pop it. Then round 2, it'll probably just move twice more and then pop it out, kind of thing. Or it could potentially move 3, and then that model could pop itself out if it doesn't have I think it's a bonus action that do that. If it has the suit in, if it has the pilot upgrade on it, which, yeah. But, actually, well, he can take Calypso's action. So yeah, he'll just take his Calypso's eject action to eject itself. It'll cost its bonus action though. So, I mean, if it has a good bonus action, you'll want Calypso to do it. But yeah, the idea is, like, Calypso is basically a Land Raider or something like that. Essentially a troop transport vehicle where it just transports the model forward and then pops it out and then lets it go to town, and kind of, it'd be good against like a heavy range crew that does a lot of range damage, because it protects it from that range damage, so it can get in position and then come in. I mean, maybe against like Levy or something. Yeah, Levy's going to kill Calypso relatively quickly, but it gives it a buffer where it's like going to have to do a bunch of damage to Calypso, then it pops out, and then it's going to go into Levy, because Levy's probably not going to be able to do much damage to it after he kills Calypso. So I think that's a common trick you're going to see with these two models, is that, or not even these two models, with just Calypso, I think you're going to see some people trying to do that. Is it great? I don't know yet. I think it's decent enough to try, so we'll find out. Alright, so let's move on to the first minion. Yeah, I think this is the first minion we're looking at, and that is the Harpooner. This is also an Apex model as well. Alright, so as far as its general traits, survival, dead average, nothing special. 7 wounds for 7 cost. So that's pretty 5 rating. As far as action economy, Predatory Instinct does help, because essentially it's kind of like a weak version of Focus, so it's not full action, but it's like plus like maybe half an action or 75% of an action kind of thing. because it'll help you. It'll be the equivalent of focusing if you're trying to just get around like concealment and that sort of thing. Or it can potentially be a plus to damage if you have focus on her and you're just wanting to really force through the damage. So kind of an extra action. Otherwise, you do have an actual third action on these guys with their massive net bonus action, because it is a full attack. It's a shockwave attack that they can do as a bonus. It is a 8-inch stagger, 8-inch range shockwave with stagger on it, which is not bad. Especially on a cheaper model, I should say, just because the opponent is less. I guess the best way to say it is its attacks are more throwaway, and I like shockwaves on cheaper models just because it's more of a throwaway model and you don't care about it. And I really like it in the sense that it only takes a 5 to go off. I don't understand why more shockwaves don't have low TNs, because I don't know, it just seems like they shouldn't have a high TN to go off in my mind. So this one's only a 5, which is pretty good. So you're going to be commonly doing it. And if you can get the staggered and damage, that's really nice. It can even do 2 damage if you hit the trigger on it, but I wouldn't count on it as it's suit inconsistent, as I like to say. Otherwise, it does have a bonus action on its harpoon gun. It is not built in, though. Essentially, it just lets you immediately shoot something and then take the massive net attack as a bonus action. Or not even a bonus action, a free action, if you will. Triggered action. So you can do that. Again, it is its reconfigure trigger, though, or reconfigure suit, which is nice. So that won't be... It'll happen more often than you might think, but it's still depending on who else you have in your crew. I think masks are... I forget which model it is, but yeah, remember when you're building your crew, like certain models, like it's Tide Collar. So it's going to be competing for Tide Collar, and I think Tide Collar is probably going to do better things with it, but if you don't take the Tide Collar, then yeah, it should be getting the masks. Otherwise, yeah, that's basically as far as all it's getting from action economy. For drain, it's not. It's probably lower drain than average, probably like a 4 instead of a 5. Just because it's bonus action, so it's a low TN. So a lot of times you're just going to flip it and not need to cheat for it. And Predatory Instinct will help with that, especially because it's not a damage flip. And it is an attack action. It's targeting. Never mind. You're not targeting with it. So it's just going to help with the harpoon gun. But I mean, it should make it less likely that you need to cheat with the harpoon gun if you're not targeting something that has a minus because of friendly fire concealment, that sort of thing. So, should help overall. As far as force, this is not a force model generally speaking because its stats are a little bit lower. I mean, obviously, Reconfigure and Deep Discover help, as it does on every model in this crew. You're more likely to have high cards, but it's only 5 stats generally, so you can't guarantee anything goes off against most other models. So, yeah, and most of its repositional things require you to hit. Your opponent basically has a way to get around it. It can dodge it or that sort of thing. Yeah. Otherwise, denial, shockwaves and staggering is good. Makes them have to burn extra actions to get in position. The harpoon gun is really good at moving things around because if you hit them, you can drag them. And it's built in to do the trigger where you can push them in any direction, not just towards you. So you can push them around as you see fit very often. And then you can also push things around with the net on a trigger. And it's the reconfigure suit. So that if you hit... Now that one's not it's definitely not force in that case because the opponent can cheat around it. But it is denial in the sense that it's positional denial. So, decent. Reach is probably above average. It's maybe like a 7 just because, all of its attacks are ranged. 12-inch, 12-inch, 8-inch. Pretty good distance range. And plus, it can help drag things out and reposition them for your other models with the harpoon gun and such, which is helping their reach. Damage, pretty average. For a 7-stone model, it's, 235. Maybe even arguably a little below, but because it gets a bonus shockwave, I think that helps put it to pretty average as far as damage. So, what does this model do? I think you're taking it mostly to reposition. If you think positioning is going to be a big deal in this game, just because the harpoon gun with the built-in trigger to push it 3 inches in any direction is going to help you get things in positions, or misposition things more often than not. You can also hit your own guys and reposition them if you want, but it's less than ideal as you don't want to damage them generally. Calypso is probably the best model to do it on because you're likely only going to do 1 damage to him. Predatory Instinct may help with that because you can put a minus on the damage flip as long as you're not worried about hitting the red joker, although you don't have to take the red joker. So yeah, I think most of the time if you're going to do your own model, you use the instinct to get a plus and then just take an extra minus to make sure you're hitting weak so you don't hurt them too bad. You can also do Reel In, which is a weird ability. Essentially, you drag yourself towards a marker or model or drag them towards you. That's more traditional, to drag them towards you. This targeting model, drag them towards you. But you can also do markers, which could have some interesting effects for like symbols, because you can like pull yourself next to symbols. Oh, that's right. You can't target strategy markers, can you? Yeah, not so good then. Good against research mission. You can pull yourself towards, or you can pull, I think, anti-research mission, you can pull their markers off of your side of the tables. They tend to put them right across the center line. So you could, in theory, drag them back, but this model's not very fast. So, yeah, I don't know how good that's going to be. Overall, the model's okay. I really probably wouldn't take it that much, though. Like, nothing it does screams to me as, like, you really want this. And at 7 soulstones, I'd rather pay a couple more, generally speaking, to just get a model that's a little bit better anyways. Like Tidecaller. I think Tidecaller more versatile in what he does than this guy. And Tidecaller's 8. And yeah, that's kind of my take on it. I don't think it's a bad model. I just don't necessarily think you would take it. 7 soulstones is always a weird cost for me. That's a cost where it has to do something unique. Because if it doesn't, I'll just pay a couple extra to go more expensive. Or it's just a glorified scheme runner, or not necessarily schemer, a model that just does something as being a significant model. In that case, I'd rather go down and pay a little less for a model that can do the same thing. So, yeah, Harpooner. Let's go into the last model then and wrap this up with the Machinist. All right, for a 5 soulstone model, I actually kind of like this guy. Survival, not great. He is going to die to most things. He can take a couple shots, maybe 3 for a lower damage model. A beater goes into him, he will die. But that being said, he's generally a model that is going to be behind something else. He does increase other models' survival, though, which is where his survival is actually better than average because of that. Because he can heal them. He can heal constructs, which is Tidecaller, Calypso, and Kia in this crew. And he can also get them shielded. Again, this synergizes with Kia, as it's another way to get shielded on her so she can do irreducible damage. And that is through the Quartermaster ability. And he can do that at range, so he can stay back a little bit. And then he can charge in and heal her if he needs to in Kia's case. So, now, is that worth it? Because Kia's already a drain, and now you're taking another model to help make her better? Probably not, but I think by himself he's fine. Yeah, as a model. Action economy, his handyman trigger essentially gives him a free action, so it is his reconfigure suit too, so he should be able to hit fairly commonly, especially if you're targeting your own models and relenting because you want to heal them. If you're targeting enemies, it's less guaranteed, but I mean, his damage track is nothing. You're targeting friendlies most of the time, is basically why you're taking him for the heal, I think, more often than not. Then he also has an actual bonus action, which is okay. It basically is an anti-drain ability because it lets you put cards that you flipped back into your deck. So you're generally going to be putting in high-value cards back in your deck, and hopefully, because you're doing that, you're going to drain need less cheating because you're going to be flipping overall higher cards. That being said, 2 cards is probably not enough to like be a huge percentile bump, but it's something. Every little bit helps, and it's a bonus action. It only takes a 5. So hopefully it's one of those actions I don't think you're ever going to cheat. You're just going to hope you flip it. Or unless you can get the bonus action off of it, which is if you put 2 crows back into the deck. If you have 2 high crows, then you can give something focus, in which case it is kind of a bonus action. So he has got some efficiency in him, so he's not terrible. Drain, he's not super high drain because most of the time you're just going to be relenting, attacking your own models, and using the Quartermaster ability, it does discard a card, but you get a draw card, so it's more card cycling. It's not really drain. Essentially, you're going to be discarding like low cards of models that whose reconfigure you don't need for that round or you don't have, and then just hopefully hitting one that you can use. So like chucking a 1 of rams when you have nothing that reconfigures on a ram and switching it to hopefully another suit you can use. So, and the fact that it's a bonus action on, or a trigger action on his wrench, which he's probably most likely going to want to be doing, is good. And again, this also not just cycles a card, but gives the model shielded. So yeah, fairly low drain, I think, for the most part, because he's just card cycling and not taking actions that require cards, generally speaking. And I don't think you cheat navigation chart. You just flip it, and if you don't have it, then you just like, whatever. As far as force, no, he's not a force model at all. He has bad stats. He's mostly just targeting your own models and helping improve them. So, yeah, he kind of increases Kia's force if you're giving her shielded, though, for irreducible damage. Yeah. I mean, his force is, he has deep discovery, so if he wanted to go against an enemy, there's a chance it may be decent, but it's not really what he wants to be doing. As far as denial, he does have Eye of the Hurricane, which is an interesting effect. Essentially, it's an aura where models in that aura can ignore enemy auras. So, anti-Pandora, kind of, to prevent her from pushing your models around and pinging them for 1. So, I mean, it's very matchup dependent. I think there are some matchups that ability could be decent because it essentially makes this a bodyguard piece where Pandora is going to want to kill this model first in order to strip that ability off and then go to town on your models with her misery aura. But there's a lot of crews that just isn't going to do anything. So your mileage will vary a lot. Although I will say there are some matchups you probably bring one of these guys in for that ability because it's good enough. And the cool thing is, in those matchups, you may want to consider not taking Bibi. Well, maybe you still take Bibi, you just don't bury him, and you put this guy in Calypso, and then you carry him forward, because then you can keep him somewhat tanky and safe, and he's giving this aura to the models, your other models, and like being like I said, tanky. Plus, he can heavy wrench as well, just like Bibi, to heal Calypso. So I think that's the other combo, is you take him and Calypso, and like, yeah, that's something you take specifically if you want Eye of the Hurricane to be effective against the enemy crew. As far as reach, pretty average. Like, the things he wants to be doing are shorter range. Killing, bad. I mean, average first cost, but overall, like probably a 4 or 5. Probably a 5. If it was 2, 3, 4 is fine. I mean, it's pretty average for a lot of models that are not beaters. So, yeah. Pretty much you take this guy if you want Eye of the Hurricane, I think. Or if you really think you're going to need a lot of healing. And you're going to take the constructs in this crew. Yeah. I think otherwise you would skip it and not take them. But yeah. Yeah. So that's kind of my thoughts on him is for Eye of Hurricane. So overall, that's EVS. I think the crew is not bad. I think it's definitely in the middle as far as I think power level. Just across the meta, I would say it's probably if you want to do the tiers S through like A, B, C, D kind of thing. S being top, D being worst. I would say that they're probably an A, maybe a B. maybe. I'd have to play them more to get a feel against matchups, different matchups, to see how they stand. But my inkling is they're probably in a good spot. Like that AB spot seems to be a good spot. I don't think we need more S tier. I think the S tier models should be dropped to A tier as far as that goes. So I think it should be a fun crew. It's a crew I would like, particularly just because of the helps mitigate bad luck to some degree with all the card manipulation abilities. And it does have some armor on top of that, so it's not like it's relying purely on card manipulation to avoid attacks. So, and that's why I played it in beta. I generally like the crew overall. I think it can be tricky in the sense that you're going to misplay Maxine a bit at first, and I think you're going to make the mistake of taking Kia in matchups you shouldn't. And then, Tidecaller can be a little tricky to, use him to his full effect. And Bibi and Calypso is just one of those, you kind of have to stare at the card and use it a couple times to kind of figure out what the heck you're doing with him. But once you know how to use it, I think it's a pretty good model overall. So, yeah, I like EVS crew, and I definitely think you'll be seeing it on the table. It's not the premier crew, I think, in Explorers. I think you're going to see a lot of Cooper and a lot of Seeker and Ivan, Umber, as I think, spoilers, I think Umber and Seeker are probably the power ones. They're the top dogs. Arguably S tier. I don't know. We'd have to see them on the table a little bit. I'll need to see them on the table to make that call. But I get an inkling that those two are the two to look for. So yeah, hope you enjoyed this, and we will be getting out more content for Explorers, and that'll be our focus for probably the next month, is just popping out Explorer stuff just like everybody else. Hopefully the content we do is a little bit more unique, and we're doing some different things, but expect for us to look at the Versatiles and give our top Versatile picks. We'll do our power ranking stuff, and then we are also going to do our top tax-in models and things like that. And then we're going to do some setup phases featuring Explorers crews. That one we're probably going to give it a few weeks so our players can get good with the Explorers crew, so they're not just walking into a matchup for the first time, so to speak, and they actually kind of know what they're doing. All right, so stay safe out there and keep playing some foe on Vassal when you can.
So that's the end of the show today. If you liked what you heard, leave us a review. You can also find more content or conversation on the Schemes and Stones blog or the Schemes and Stones Discord channel. Also, if you have any questions, comments, you can find us on Facebook or send a message to the Schemes and Stones email linked in the show notes.